Few questions have shaped the world more than this one. Was Jesus of Nazareth the Son of God or the son of some man? Did he really come to reverse the fall, or did he even come at all? 2,000 years of scholarship and holy war later, and all I've got to show for it is thousands of Talk Heathen phone calls and no solid evidence for a God. Think you can shed some light on Jesus the man, the myth, the mystery? Well, give us a call, because the show is coming right now. Welcome, everyone. Today is September 21st, 2025. I'm your host, Christy Powell, and joining me today for the first time is Godless Engineer. Glad to have you on with me.
Hi, what's up, heathens? How y'all doing?
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. We've got a pretty interesting question on deck. This is honestly a question that I have maybe turned my nose up or sort of avoided because of the why does it matter piece of it all. Plenty of people live and die, and as far as I know, none of them, except for maybe one, but probably not that one, but maybe, have been the Son of God. So, why does it matter if Jesus was a real person? I'm really excited to get into it with you.
Oh, yeah. And this is a topic that, a lot of people know me for. And I definitely agree that this is a niche topic that really the most productive conversations can be had between atheists on the topic that, isn't.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. That isn't, dogmatically holding to the magical version of these stories. That we've already put that aside, and we're trying to really do the hard work of determining what's true about history. And that's a lot harder than a lot of people like to think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Talk Heathen is a live call-in show. We have open lines, so get your calls in. We're at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. As always on Talk Heathen, we are open to all of your questions about religion, secular humanism, atheistic morality, cosmology, philosophy, science, history, life, the universe, and everything. Today, we're very excited to talk about the historicity of Jesus, the mythicism of Jesus. Anybody else that you're hoping to hear from today?
I'm up for any kind of topic, but I mean, the mythicism topic obviously is something that I'm very much into, but I try to stay pretty well versed in just almost any vertical as far as the atheist and secular sort of space, would involve. So I'm up for anything.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get into it. I'll say just quickly that Talk Heathen is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. With that, what do you say we go ahead and jump on the lines and talk to Jesse, who I believe takes the position that Jesus really did exist. Jesse, what you got for us today?
Hi, thanks for having me up. I've heard of this show for a while, so it's cool to be up here. But yeah, so I'm an atheist, but I do think Jesus probably existed, only comparing him to what we have for, let's just say, classical figures. So for people like Brasidas and Lysander and Demosthenes and Cleon, Nicias, these people are accepted to be true or to have actually existed, despite people arguing about what is attributed to them having actually been done. These people do not have inscriptions anywhere. There's no coins with their faces on it. They're just mentioned sometimes in passing by Thucydides or Xenophon or Herodotus. And it just seems like that sort of evidence is at the very least comparable to what we have for Jesus.
Right. Hey, Jesse, I'm just wondering, are any of those people venerated as a deity that provides salvation to anybody that believes in them?
No.
Okay. Then it seems like it doesn't matter.
Arguing the acts, right? Not the that I already acknowledge that people do debate the acts of Lysander and of Brasidas, how many men they actually had. how accurate are the speeches they gave. So yeah, people.
Right.
Do we need to
always
have a
debate the
higher
act.
barrier for evidence? Like, is there a higher bar for somebody when they claim to be the Son of God? Does that matter?
No, in the same way that if I was to claim to be the Son of God, like right now, it would not become harder for you to prove that I existed.
I think that's fair
Just
to
like
say.
me, the
How do you
person
respond,
claiming.
Godless Engineer?
Well, so this is obviously a reference class error here, because we're not actually talking about those types of figures that you're mentioning. What we're talking about are figures that started out being venerated deities. If you look at the actual evidence that we have of Jesus, the very first mentions of Jesus are of him being a venerated celestial deity. So, like, mentioning these people that are not in the same reference class as Jesus seems to be a pointless endeavor, because you're going to end up with a false analogy fallacy. And that's essentially what you're committing here. I think that if you were to really do a comparison, you would want to compare Jesus to like Romulus.
Because I just don't think that the claims that somebody makes, so like the claims that a particular person makes are going to be a separate thing from the actual existence of the person. So, like,
okay, I totally agree, Jesse. Hold on, Jesse.
It definitely
Jesse, hold on. I'm sorry to stop you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to stop you, but I do want to ask, what evidence do you have that doesn't contain those like aspects?
Doesn't contain what aspects? Sorry.
Well, the aspects that you're having a problem with here, because I'm talking about how Jesus started off being a venerated deity, and you say, well, that's the acts. That's like, these extra things that are put on them. Okay, fine. What are some core things that you think are attested outside of those supposed acts that are foisted upon Jesus?
Yeah, but Jesus is referenced by people that are accepted to have existed. And like the sorry thing to admit is, for anyone that's interested in history, is that is the bar of evidence. Thucydides was accepted to have existed. And so
okay, I'm sorry, Jesse, you keep going back to Thucydides and all this other stuff. That really doesn't matter in this particular case. I'm talking about Jesus. So if maybe we can just focus on Jesus. And I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but I'm trying to keep the conversation on track here. So I'm just trying to look for what evidence do you have? You say that there's evidence outside of like the biblical evidence for people mentioning Jesus, but the core problem in this particular situation is we're trying to discern between dependent evidence, meaning that this evidence is dependent upon the Gospels or upon Paul, and versus independent evidence. So what independent evidence of the Gospels and Paul do we have that would be similar to these
other? That's relevant. I don't think that's a relevant question. Be the same. Like, I hate that I get that you don't like me bringing up other historians of different eras, but it's like it's
not actually bringing up other historians, Jesse.
Of any classical figure. If I asked you, like,
you're not giving me any evidence, Jesse.
This is independent.
You're still not giving me any evidence.
Historical evidence means having been mentioned. Like, that's by people who definitely exist.
So tell me who mentions them.
Evidence.
Right.
Peter
so tell me who mentions them. I feel like I'm asking like a reasonable question here.
So that I'm clarifying, and so that the audience is following along, is your contention, Godless Engineer, that if it is sort of a religious reference, if people are saying not just there was a man, but there was a son of God, that type of evidence or that type of reference doesn't hold the same weight or exists in a different classification?
Well, no, so that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that we need independent evidence of this, independent accounting of it. So, like, if you wanted to use
true
Paul,
believers.
Right. Well, I mean, if you wanted to use Paul, you could use Paul, and we can talk about the several different verses in Paul, like Romans 1:3, Galatians 4:4, Galatians 1:19. We could discuss those if you wanted to, and we could definitely talk about how those either do or do not prove a historical Jesus existed, but that's one source. Every other source that comes after Paul was writing is actually inspired in some kind of way, either directly or indirectly, by Paul's work. So you can't then cite evidence that is using Paul's work in order to justify a historical Jesus.
That's literally how the transmission of all of history has happened. Like, are you aware of like So like Arian is the first historian of Alexander the Great we have, but like we don't have any of the.
No, he's not the first, but he's the best.
On.
Just to be
So
specific,
like, we don't have independent. No, but he's not the first. He's just the first. He's just the earliest that we have. He was basing his.
No, he's not the earliest that we have. Like there are other biographies of Alexander the Great that exist, and if you want to go down that road, we can. But see, the difference between Arrian's account of Alexander the Great's story and his biography is that Arrian actually mentions at least two, if I remember correctly, eyewitnesses to Alexander the Great. One of them was his generals, was a general of his, and so Arrian had direct access to firsthand accounts of him, and these are also independent accounts. So, like the two accounts that he uses do not play off of each other; they are independently attesting to Alexander the Great, and that's not even getting into the whole archaeological evidence of like coins minted in his visage or historical events that could have only happened due to Alexander the Great accomplishing them. We're not even talking about that. We're just talking about textual accounting. So like Arrian, even though he's 500 years later, he has firsthand eyewitness accounts that he discusses. He discusses how those how he reconciles contradictions in his sources, and he has all of this in like this prologue section to the biography of Arrian or biography of Alexander the Great, where he discusses these. We don't have that for Jesus whatsoever. We don't have anything like that. The Gospels don't do it. Paul doesn't do it. In fact, Paul separates himself from any.
Paul is a contemporary. Like who was Paul persecuting? Like very shortly after the crucifixion.
Show me.
So like
Jesse.
Sorry, what?
Jesse, can you cite for me in Paul's epistles where Paul directly says that he got this information from any human source? Because I feel like if you read Galatians 1:11, you're going to be disappointed.
What, like the information about like his view of Jesus after his revelation?
Any kind, like let me ask you this just directly. Does Paul separate himself from any human sourcing, or does he use human sourcing? Okay, are you just going to not listen to me?
Worshipping a person who never existed, that they also called a man?
No. I think Paul totally believed that he existed. It's just in what form did he exist? So like Paul believed in a celestial Jesus that revealed himself to the apostles. And there's no evidence in Paul's epistles that he ever thought of Jesus as like a human being that walked on earth. Now I don't mean that he thought of Jesus as like some ghosty spirity kind of guy. He definitely believed in a flesh and blood Jesus. But at this particular time in the first century, Jews thought that like the afterlife, the heavens, the firmament was a real place, and it was inhabited by flesh and blood creatures, demons and Satan and all this other stuff, as well as Jesus was there for a time being under Paul's view. Just like in many other Mediterranean cults at that time, they thought that the afterlife was a very specific physical place that could be traversed to, and so Paul was just following along in that kind of ideology.
But do you think Paul was like among the first Christians to like attribute like manhood to Jesus?
Well, no, I think that what Paul did was if you're going to ask me a question, then you need to let me answer. Well, it's pointless to ask me a question and then just keep talking. Okay, what's your clarification?
If you waited literally half a second, I would have clarified the question.
Yeah, let's get that question.
Oh, sorry. You
waiting on you, Jesse?
Yeah, Jesse. If you'll collect your thoughts, can you ask that question again and whatever clarifiers you need?
Yeah. So, with the people who would have been worshiping Jesus prior to Paul, did they believe that they were worshiping someone who only existed in like space world, or someone that had existed in the actual world? Like, was Paul the first to think that Jesus was the celestial deity, or that Jesus was a celestial deity?
obviously, Paul, Paul came about his theology through a deep investigation of the scriptures. He also came to it by revelation directly from Jesus. And so I think that Paul, given that Peter was one of the first that even Paul says Jesus appeared to, there were obviously Christians that came to this same theology before Paul. It's just that Paul read the scripture and received revelation and agreed with them. We know this because in Galatians 2, Paul talks about, returning back to Jerusalem, conversing with the other apostles, and them adding nothing else to his theology. So his theology obviously matched the other apostles that were going around, but it's really problematic for historicists because the theology is that Jesus was purely a revelatory being that had flesh and blood because they believed in a literal firmament that contained flesh and blood creatures. And so this is all part of the Jewish theology of the time. So, I mean, no, Paul was not the first to think it, but it was very easily determined or it was very easily interpreted from the existing Jewish theology and Jewish scripture.
Yeah, so like given like the culture at that time's theology, they could have possibly interpreted that way. But Paul,
no, we know that they did. We know Paul definitely did. Sorry, it's not just possible. Like it's plausible. Like it's definitely how Paul was interpreting scripture.
So Paul definitely never believed that Jesus ever like walked in a human form.
No, that's not what I said. I said that Paul believed. Hold on, if you'll listen to me real quick, I said that Paul believed in a flesh and blood Jesus. It's just that this flesh and blood Jesus only existed in the celestial realm, which is in the lower parts of the celestial realm, which is the firmament. The firmament was a physical place to them. So Paul believed that he was a very physical person. Even those adjacent to Paul's community, they believed in these things. I can't remember. I can get you the exact verse, but in Hebrews, they very painfully make it obvious that Jesus became in the image of man. He took the image of man, or took the form of man, in order to die and resurrect. So he was made in that likeness, and this is stressed throughout Paul's work as well as Hebrews, which
like
Paul didn't write Hebrews in the firmament.
So like where was Jesus's? Okay, so Jesus had like an otherworldly crucifixion or like a celestial one.
Yes.
Because like there was like a resurrection, right? But it just was not on like the earthly plane. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, well, according to Paul, there was a resurrection. I don't think there was a resurrection, just like I don't think there was a historical Jesus. But I mean, yeah, Paul believed in the resurrection.
Yeah,
but that resurrection like took place in a place that you or I could visit.
Was it something that people in the area that Jesus allegedly existed in could have viewed?
No.
Like, who was the Roman? Like
the Roman. I don't know.
Is meant to be. So was it a celestial like Roman that pierced the side of Jesus? Like were there like two?
Oh no! All of that is made up in the Gospels. Where does Paul talk about Jesus being pierced in the side?
Okay, so like these stories would have existed. I mean, like you sound very knowledgeable, so I'm not trying to be a dick. Did Paul ever like reference like worldly accounts of like the resurrection and like or discount them?
No, I mean, Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 15 that according to the scriptures, Jesus died, and then according to the scriptures, he resurrected. So it seems to me like according to the scriptures are the only sources that Paul uses. Like the scriptures are the only sources that he uses. He also states revelation as the reason why. So, I mean, let me ask you this there, Jesse. So what is your hold on. What is your problem with the fact that Paul only ever references revelation and scripture as where he gets his information from? Why do you have to add information to Paul's work? Huh?
Because he never met Jesus. That sounds like, I mean, He's a guy who never met Jesus and then also met people who claimed, or at least historically claimed, to have met a historical Jesus. So yeah.
Oh no, no, they didn't. Where does he? Where do they say that?
The other hosts, yeah.
Where does anybody say that?
He says about you.
Where does Paul say that anybody physically met Jesus?
Well, he's relying on the scriptures, right? So like you're literally saying he's relying on the scriptures that are depicting a worldly Jesus, but then you're saying he does not believe.
No, the scriptures aren't depicting a worldly Jesus.
Well, so to clarify, Paul is not referencing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When we refer to those scriptures, we're talking about writers that come after Paul. Do I have that right?
Well, no, the scriptures would be the Septuagint and other scriptures that are not contained. So these are Hebrew scriptures in Jewish theology.
Right. So as Paul is talking about getting his information from the scriptures, he's definitely not talking about the Gideon's Bible.
You there, Jesse? Do we still have Jesse?
Seem to, but okay. Nope, we have lost that connection. Well, fair enough. So
Nice.
I guess I just want to really clarify that bit at the end, that when we're talking about Paul and we're talking about sort of Paul's understanding of the scripture, we're not referring to scriptures as modern Christians think of it, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of those pieces that were based on and came after Paul, even if they're not in that order in the book. Yeah?
No, yeah, true. And especially for Paul, it's going to be the Septuagint. That's going to be what he learned and what he's basing all of his interpretations on. And there's a few notable things in the Septuagint that are different than the Hebrew, and that's how we know that he used, the Septuagint. That's what he would be using, at least.
All right. Well, fair enough. If you're ready, let's go ahead and jump into a kind of interesting call from JC in Spain. I'm very curious about this question you have for us, JC. What's on your mind?
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I wrote this. I just want to know or hear your guys' thoughts if you think Jesus, if he lived in today's world, if he would choose to be vegan. So a vegan is just somebody who does not needlessly exploit animals.
Yeah, I would have a hard time with that idea, just depending on how we define who Jesus is or was. Obviously, if we come to it with the idea that Jesus never existed, then anything is up for grabs. And that being said, if we're playing along with the idea of Jesus, then I have to say that we should include the idea that he was the beginning and the end and that he's unchanging. So if 2,000 years ago, Jesus wasn't vegan, I don't know why modern day Jesus would be vegan. I don't know how God can say, go be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth, rule over the fish, rule over the birds of the sky, rule over every living creature that moves on the earth, and then frame this idea of like a peaceful, hippie, vegan Jesus in the modern era. I don't know. Godless Engineer, how does that land for you?
Yeah, the vegan sort of lifestyle or initiative, I mean, as far as I understand it, like the push for it is fairly recent, like a fairly modern thing. So, I mean, I would think that if Jesus were still around today after 2,000 years, I don't see any reason why he would be vegan, but I mean, all of this is really speculation about it. But I mean, considering the demeanor of first century Jews, like they weren't really concerned with ethical treatment of animals. So I don't think that he would be.
So you think he would be okay with needlessly killing animals? Because one could make the argument that back in the days, it might have been needed for survival to consume these animals. And that's why I was asking about today's time, right? Where somebody can choose to either needlessly kill animals or not to do so. And if you're with the concept of a benevolent, compassionate individual, I don't see how that individual could needlessly kill animals, like when there's other options.
Sure, but you're calling the historical Jesus or the character of Jesus this benevolent person, and I can appreciate that characterization, but we're also basing everything that we know or don't know or imagine or understand about Jesus on these books that are allegedly perfect and that have not been changed and that reflect a God who has always been one particular way. It kind of comes down to this question of, does God evolve? And I think that most Christian theology would reject that idea. If God was all powerful 2,000 years ago, then he didn't need to rely on meat, but chose to.
Yeah, it also seems kind of weird to expect, at least for me, it seems weird to either think about or expect a figure from a religion that regularly mandated the slaughter of animals in order to perform blood magic. And I'm not just talking about one or two animals. We're talking about thousands of animals is what they depict in the Hebrew Bible of slaughtering them. And I mean, I just want people to really take this in because they were pretty explicit in the Hebrew Bible. Like they wanted you to sacrifice the animal, right? But also then cut out its entrails and burn them to a crisp, like on an altar, so that he could, for some reason, like either for the free smells, like he's had some kind of ancient Jimmy John's or like something, I don't know. But I just don't see why this figure from history would ever care whatsoever about the suffering of animals.
Okay, maybe to rephrase then, let's not and talk about the character, but would a compassionate individual in today's world needlessly kill animals?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, and I definitely appreciate the vegan movement. I very much appreciate this notion that we should, as a moral society, mitigate or limit or eradicate to our ability all harm and suffering caused to conscious creatures. Does that mean that it is impossible to be a compassionate human being without being a vegan? I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to take that position, but I can at least appreciate the idea of it.
Okay. I mean, just to be clear, veganism is not about reducing suffering. It's about not exploiting animals, like using them for our benefit, where we have options. So for me personally, I don't see how somebody, I'm not saying non-vegans are not compassionate, but somebody who's like aware that they are needlessly killing animals, I don't see how that could be a compassionate person who then goes out of their way to pay for that to happen. And
yeah, we would really have to define the word needless or the concept of need. In psychology, when we discuss a need, it's not out of this contrast with a want. It's not based on the idea that like you have to have certain things in order to survive versus things that you would just kind of enjoy. At least in my field, when we talk about a need, it is something that empowers us or enables us to achieve our absolute highest level of performance or potential. So can we really say that slaughtering animals is needless? We'd really have to define our terms and talk about what we mean, all of which gets pretty far astray from the notion of what would Jesus do. But I'm willing to go down that road with you if you like.
Yeah, for sure. So what I mean with need is not required for survival or for your health. Like you can be just as healthy on a plant-based diet, making the killing of these animals. By the way, also the animals in the milk industry, egg industry, even the wool industry, all of them end up in the slaughterhouse. So I'm just saying, yeah, it's not required, and the killing of them is needless killing.
I do hear that, and I really am sympathetic to your point of view while wanting to point out that there is a lot of, quote, needless suffering that exists in our world if you use that definition of the word needless. Do I need a high-powered cell phone? Do I need fast fashion? Do I need to be able to stream Netflix? All of these industries are fraught with all kinds of moral issues and are no doubt responsible for human suffering. And I, at the very least, want to rank human suffering as equally important, if not slightly more important, than the suffering of non-human species. Does it matter? Do I care about the well-being of animals? Do I care about humans being careless and taking advantage of animal welfare and well-being or taking it for granted? Yeah, I do think that these issues matter, but to just categorize it as needless or as important or whatever else feels really narrow. And I can't say that I'm really along for your definitions here.
Okay, yeah, the difference there with the human suffering, again, veganism is about not exploiting animals, so using them as tools of slavery. The difference there is that in this human industries, no one is getting bred into existence to be forced into a slaughterhouse. So it's like a severity difference there, right? So it's like,
again, we might be playing with words to a certain extent. It's certainly not as if any human being has ever sired another human being with the express intention of extracting labor from them. That is not a claim that we can really make historically or even in the modern era. So again, I appreciate where you're coming from, but it does feel kind of philosophically flimsy to me.
I don't see how. I don't know if we are talking past each other. I mean, we are just talking about taking the life of another sentient being when you have the option to do so. I mean, if you guys are taking the lives of humans, if you don't need to do so, we can talk about that first. But if you're not doing that, I think the bigger elephant in the room is the needless slaughter of trillions of animals per year.
I mean, at the macro scale, we are needlessly, to use these definitions, taking the lives of human beings in a great number of ways. So I don't mean to get mixed up in whataboutism or say like, well, we'll deal with veganism when we have like dealt with all war and ended all human suffering. I don't want to be that careless with it, but I'm having a really hard time seeing how your position really fits in the context of the modern world.
Like, are you currently paying for humans to be killed?
I mean, in a complex way, I'm certainly not ever sitting down and making the decision, oh, yes, I will contribute to human suffering in this way. And I am very aware that there are companies that I regularly contribute money to that have abysmal human rights records. I try to be a responsible consumer. I try to be thoughtful about these kinds of things. And I know that, to use Coca-Cola as one example, anytime I am buying a Coke product, I am giving money to an organization with a human rights record that we can very directly tie to unnecessary deaths.
Mm-hmm. And exploitation, right? Unnecessary exploitation. Because the thing is, right, and whenever somebody buys any animal product, you know for a fact that an animal is going to get killed for that, to replace that item, right, by a supply and demand. So I don't know if that's the case in things like Coke. And even if that was the case in things like Coke, how would that justify also then killing the animals and taking their lives if you don't have to?
Yeah, I mean, direct and indirect consequences, like these are very thorny issues. I think we're kind of just right back to arguments that we've heard before about how veganism is potentially a much more moral perspective. And there are reasons to push back against that. There are things to consider in terms of having a world of finite resources and putting these restrictions on what resources are available to us. I don't know how deeply I want to go into that since I feel like we've had this veganism conversation before. Godless Engineer, is there anything that I may be missing here that you want to make sure to throw in?
Well, yeah, I just had a quick thought, and maybe JC has a good explanation for me or a good response, but let's just hypothetically, entertaining an idea without accepting it, let's just say that we forego, like the entire human race forgoes all meat products, right? And we just rely on a vegan lifestyle. How do you explain the massive destruction of ecological systems in order to provide the amount of food that we would need to provide for the entire human race to be vegan, as well as producing, any supplements that we would need to use for like iron and stuff, or however, I'm not sure how that's accounted for in veganism. I'm assuming that you would have to take supplements in order to get all the nutrients that you would normally get. I'm just wondering, how do you respond to the wanton destruction of whole ecological systems in order to produce enough food for us?
Okay. So that is not really a vegan question because veganism is concerned with the exploitation, so the slavery status of animals, but I'm still happy to answer this environmental question. So currently we are growing 75% of the plants that we grow are for the farmed animals, because these farmed animals are also eating something, right? So if the environment is your concern, going on the plant-based diet, like many people do who are plant-based for the environment, would be the best thing you can do, because not only are you going to save on land, we will need much, much less land to produce the plants that we eat directly, rather than growing plants to feed to the animals. And we'd also need much less water. There would be much less emissions, all this refrigeration and so on, transportation of these products from the farms to the animals, and then killing the animals and so on. So it's much more inefficient to be consuming animal products, first of all.
Yeah, if we are starting from scratch, like if we are able to play SimCity and just rejigger the entire global economy, I think that that's very true. And on an individual basis, I think that that can also be very true. But if I'm understanding Godless Engineer's question, it's more of a, how do we get there? You know, if we were to just make that switch overnight because we have this moral calling to never cause the death or exploitation of an animal, we get ourselves into incredibly dangerous situations that negatively impact the health and well-being of millions, if not billions, of currently living humans.
Yeah, again, we grow 75% of the crops for the animals, right? So we wouldn't have a problem of food shortage or anything like this.
I mean, we would,
so I don't know.
You know, not to say that we can't work through those growing pains or that we shouldn't be working in that direction, which, by the way, just speaking for myself, is a philosophy that I support and that I am wanting to be a part of.
I'm not understanding something. But I mean, you're taking back like the amount of food that we're growing specifically for animals, but I feel like that would entail the question of, well, how are these animals going to eat? How are they going to survive? Like, I mean, we've domesticated them, and you know, a lot of them wouldn't know how to live out in the wild. Are you suggesting that we reduce their population to where they can live off of whatever we're not going to farm, or like, what's the solution there?
Yeah, so the world isn't going to go vegan overnight, right? It's just going to be 1% at a time. And if you, for example, decide to be vegan today, then there'll be less animals which are in future bred into existence to be killed for you. So currently, we kill just land animals, approximately 80 billion land animals, right? And the more people who go vegan, the less animals will be bred into existence, because these animals are not producing naturally, right? There's artificial insemination, like in the dairy industry and so on. So the more people go vegan, the less animals there will be produced, right? And when we eventually get to the vegan world, where everyone is vegan, we will also have things like sanctuaries, which already exist now, which are places to keep these animals till the end of their life without exploiting and needlessly killing them. But we are so far from that, and I don't know exactly how that will turn around. But fact is, currently, if you're not vegan, each time you buy animal products, you are paying for animals to be bred into existence and kicked into a slaughterhouse for products you do not need or require for survival or health.
Again, I push back on that notion of need, but I very much take your point, and I'm sympathetic to it. And maybe it is just my own inability to fully embrace a vegan lifestyle that it has me on the defensive or not willing to accept what you're saying whole cloth. I do really take your point, and I think that the world will be a better place as we progressively rely more and more on non-meat food sources, and as we progressively more and more get away from the dairy industry and from other things that lead to greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, and to very tangible suffering among the animal population. Does that mean that I am willing at this stage of my life to wholly stop eating meat? It doesn't. And perhaps I should, and perhaps that's just an unexamined part of myself. But I also know that for myself and doubtlessly billions of other people, that seems like a remarkable impracticability while trying to live in alignment with my other values, which I do have a responsibility to triage and to try and navigate. That's what I was mentioning earlier when I brought up ideas like Coca-Cola and Nestle. It's not that we have to currently live in some perfect nirvana to make a decision about working towards these things. It is, however, true that I know that I can't do all of the moral good or avoid all of the moral harm in the world that I would like, and that I have a moral responsibility to myself and my family and my community and the world at large to make as wise-minded decisions about this as I possibly can. And at least for my family in the here and now, veganism is not at the top of the priority list. And I hope that that makes sense and is okay. Maybe I'll lose more sleep over it overnight and start drifting further in that direction. But I know I'm just not there myself. And I think that would be true for many in the audience.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, veganism is not really concerned with what you eat necessarily, right? Again, it's about not exploiting animals. I know we are focusing a lot on the diet aspect, but vegans also don't buy clothing that exploits animals, cosmetics that tested on animals. We also don't go to the zoo.
I know I'm oversimplifying in those ways, and I definitely appreciate that. And I do want to be an ethical consumer, but ethical consumption means making a lot of compromises and trying to figure out sort of the least moral evil in a lot of ways. You know, it's much easier for me to say that I'm not going to go to a zoo, and then maybe I can have conversations about like rehabilitative zoos or sanctuary zoos, and is that okay, or to what extent, and is this particular one morally superior to a SeaWorld or some other type of zoo? And there are important decisions to be making here, and I think we also, as human beings, have to acknowledge the decision fatigue that comes from taking this task on. I'm not saying we should be lazy or just dismiss all of it. I'm saying that me, myself, and my family, we're not there yet.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, the main thing I want to convey here is just that people are aware, because most people are not born vegan. Myself, I used to consume these products every day. I was just not aware that I am directly responsible for the killing of animals, even though I don't have to. So it just boils down to the question, do you think it's okay for you to kill animals just because you want to? And that's a question you guys need to answer for yourself, and I guess your audience too. And if somebody's not okay with killing animals just because they want to, then they should go vegan, because every time they purchase any animal product, they are killing animals just because they want to, even though there are other alternatives.
Yeah. So again, I'll just say that need and want dichotomy feels very narrow and limited for me. But I take your point, and I think that's everything on me. Godless Engineer, please let you take it out.
I mean, I feel like that's just as ridiculous as asking like a lion to go vegan, and like a lion just kills because they want to, you know, they want to, or something like that.
Want to murder gazelles.
Yeah, or something. Like I feel like I'm in agreement with you, Christy. I feel like it's kind of a narrow dichotomy there, and I just framing it in the way that you're framing it, JC, I feel like adds a whole bunch of like preconditions and maybe some presuppositions onto it that just makes it loaded. Like it's just an entirely loaded dichotomy there.
So we appreciate, JC, your questions about moral philosophy, and I think that you are raising some interesting topics. I think we're going to get back to our show on the evidence of God and how we react to it, but I appreciate your call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your time, guys. It was awesome talking to you. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Take good care. All right, so it was a little bit slipped in with the question of would Jesus be vegan, but I was willing to play along, and I do think that there's some interesting moral philosophy to consider about our impact on the world and our impact on others, and how we as atheists derive our moral philosophy if it's not coming from God's edict to take dominion over the land or his list of 10 commandments. Anything else you want to add here?
Well, I'll just say that if we can get to a point where like either that 3D printed meat is viable, like it financially, fiscally viable, or
and also ecologically, you know, as we're using the electricity and everything else, those are big questions.
Yeah, if we can come up with meat alternatives where we don't have to, slaughter animals in order to get meat or anything like that, I'd be totally up for that. And for me personally, what I try to do is I try to minimize the amount of suffering. Like what amount of suffering is in my power to minimize. I try
Right.
my best to minimize it. I try to ethically source like any eggs or any meat products that I get here at the house, and that typically ends up being kind of difficult, but we carefully curate what kind of meat we get and where we get it from.
Right. And that's the thing that I didn't want to be accused of like trying to brag on here. Like, well, I'm not vegan, but because I do take that sort of black and white perspective that JC is putting forward. And I want to question it with, you know what, my family is thoughtful about only buying pork that we know is farm raised, whereas we're less responsible about chickens. We try not to eat octopus. Are these the right moral decisions for us to be making? I don't know. They're the ones that we came to after some thought and some reason. So they're not just arbitrary and out of nowhere, but they're also not going to be nearly as black and white as what JC is pushing for. Something for everybody, I think, to just be thoughtful about as we're intentional and mindful in our consumption.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, with that, let's go ahead and jump into another call from Bernard in New York. Bernard, what do you have for us?
Yes, hello. My name is
Hey,
Bernard.
what's on your mind?
I want to express my opinion that the Old Testament had to be written by a superior being and not by a person. And that would sort of like prove there must be a God, because there's something here in the Old Testament that's not feasible to think that a person could have written it. I'm talking.
Yeah, I mean, certainly one person couldn't have. If they did, I would hope that they would catch a lot of their textual errors and a lot of those confusions.
Even a group of people. It couldn't be written by a human being, and I'll explain why. And
Okay.
if you look in Numbers 14, it talks over there about what animals we're allowed to eat and what we're not allowed to eat. And they say that the animals that we're allowed to eat are only those that have split hooves and eat their cud. I don't know how to say it in English. To they rejuvenate. They eat the cud, bring it back, and eat it again, whatever it is.
Okay. So Numbers chapter 14 has some restrictions on what people ought to eat, and that proves that it was written by a supernatural being. Because why?
No, 1 second.
Okay.
Not that alone. Those are the two signs. And then it says that there are three animals that don't have split hooves. I mean, that have a split. Excuse me. That don't have split hooves, but they rejuvenate. They have they eat their cud. I don't know how you say it in English. Right?
Yeah, I'm not overly worried about the specifics of these rules. I'm trying to understand how the existence of these rules is evidence of the existence of God.
No, not the existence of the rule. The existence of how do you know? For instance, it says that the pig is the only animal that has split hooves and doesn't have the other sign of cud.
Bernard, I really don't mean to push the fast forward button, but I do want to know, is this conversation going to eventually lead to the people at the time had no possible way of knowing that this would be good for their diet?
No, not that it's good for the diet. There's no possible way that the people in that time, any person in that time, would know that the pig is the only animal with split hooves that doesn't have the other sign, and that there are three other animals that have the other sign and don't have split hooves. How would he know that? Until to this day, another animal with split hooves, like the pig, that doesn't have the other sign is not found. Nobody ever.
The other sign?
Like that. Now, who would know that that's the only animal In other words,
I'm sorry. What two signs is it? So the split hooves, and then what's the other one? Sorry, I got lost in the meandering. What's the other sign?
I'm not sure how to say it in English. That it eats its cud. The food that it eats, it will sort of like brings it back up and eats it again.
Oh, okay.
You can read it in English. If you read it in English, it'll tell you exactly in English how it is. I'm reading the Hebrew here, so I don't know how to split it in English. But
okay.
there were two
well, so regardless of these things that we can actually just observe by looking at pigs, because that's how we figured out that they do those things. There's a lot of anachronisms that are contained in the Old Testament that seem to invalidate this whole godly inspiration for the Old Testament. Like, for instance, when Joshua invaded what's that one town? The walls of Jericho. When Jacob or Joshua invaded Jericho and brought down the walls, do you know that archaeology actually places the walls of Jericho falling I think it's 1,000 years before Joshua supposedly did it? And so that makes it, when the story was circulating and the time frame that it was about, Joshua literally just had to walk into a barren, destroyed city. And so that is not at all anything that the Bible recalls. And then you could also go to Exodus. There's no archaeological evidence or historical evidence for a massive exodus of Jews from Egypt, let alone there being a massive slave force of Jews in Egypt that then escaped, So, I mean, none of that is actually proved. The current mainstream historical, I'll get to my final point here in a second. The final mainstream consensus of Hebrew Bible scholars is that none of the patriarchs actually existed. They are all metaphorical constructions of people in order to tell a fictionalized history of the Jewish people. So I don't know. What do you have to say about that?
Well, what I have to say is the fact that there's no evidence doesn't mean it didn't happen. That's not.
No, but it does mean that you can't prove that it did. It does mean that
we
you
can't use that as
it.
evidence for the existence of a supernatural God, which was the claim that you came in to prove to us.
If I can prove that it couldn't be written by a person, it must have been written by some what do you call it? The only person. No, for instance, here with the animals, the only one that would know that the pig is the only animal that has only the one sign of the split hooves and not the other. And any other animal doesn't have it, that would only be the one that created the animals would know that. Who else would know that? There's no way.
I don't feel like you've sufficiently proven it to me that there's only one animal that meets these two requirements. And some of that may have to do with the quality of our connection and the quality of our language barriers and some of the background noises that we're trying to sort through as we're listening to you. But I'm not there with you yet.
I'm saying that there's 3,000 years ago this was said, this was written, and ever since then, no other animal with split hooves without the other sign has been found. In other words,
I hear you making that claim that the pig is the only animal that had these two signs, but I'm still really struggling with how that connects us to the existence of God.
Explaining that the one that wrote in the Old Testament that the pig is the only animal that has split hooves and doesn't have the other sign of regerves, whatever the thing is in English. How to say it? I don't know how to say it, but the only one that's the only animal, and no other animal was ever found even since then to have that thing. The only the split hooves without the what do you call it? Is
the hippopotamus.
The only one that would actually know that is the one that created it.
Do you think? What about the hippopotamus? The hippopotamus was in Egypt at that time. Like they would have been in the rivers, of Egypt. The hippopotamus is also a split, like the split.
But I don't know. Split completely the way the way the what do you call it is. I don't think it is.
Okay, yeah. We could go special pleading if you wanted to. I mean, that kind of seems like the way that you want to go about it. But I mean, special pleading is not any kind of way to build like a successful argument for your God. But so like there's pig and related species. So there's pecaries, which are New World pigs that also follow this path right here that you're talking about. Warthogs and African wild pigs, which are still pigs. I'll give you that. But I mean, there's a hippopotamus and all these different variations of pigs.
Fine. So the variations of pigs is the same as a pig. I guess it's from the same family, maybe. But hippopotamus will surely not be. And I don't think that has the split hoof that it says by the pig.
Okay. Well, it doesn't. The fact that the hippopotamus fits your criteria here and is not mentioned by God seems to disprove your God, or at least your argument. Not disprove your God. Sorry, it disproves your argument.
Criteria. How does it fit the criteria? You're saying
it's a split. It's a split-hooved animal that doesn't chew cud, like you were talking about. Yeah, unless I misunderstood that. Did I misunderstand that?
I'm not sure that it has split hooves the way the pig has.
I'm verifying for you that it does have split hooves.
It does have split hooves, and I'm not sure.
It does have split hooves, and it does not chew cud.
How does that fact make you feel, Bernard? Like, you don't have to take our word for it. You can certainly grab your encyclopedia or talk to a veterinarian or whoever else when we're done here. But if that's true, if there is an animal that kind of blows apart your argument here, what does that mean for you?
Right. Well, that'll be a very, very powerful argument against me. I agree, but I don't think that is the case.
Okay, well, I mean, none of us here are biologists. I don't have any hippos in front of me for us to inspect. I believe that Godless Engineer can like look that up on the fly and come back with this information, and then you can choose whether or not to accept it. But what does that mean for you? You know, how does it feel to recognize that at least this justification for God probably doesn't hold up?
Well, if it doesn't hold up, that'll be a problem. But I have to make sure that it doesn't hold up. According to me,
can you just entertain the possibility that this particular argument for God doesn't make any sense, and talk to me about how that makes you feel or what that means for your life?
Well, first of all, I'm not agreeing with you that that's the case.
Sure. Hypothetical.
So I'm saying that. So I don't. There's nothing to talk about unless I find out for sure.
Okay, I'm ready to wrap up the call, and I really just wanted to give you a moment to imagine with us and to kind of sit with the possibility, maybe even the thought experiment that this is a readily disprovable belief system that you've come to. You know, I mean, I can tell you that my producer is right now sending us messages full of examples of why this argument for God doesn't make sense if you have any fluency in biology. Personally, I don't. I am not familiar with the important distinctions between pigs and hippopotamuses and all of these kinds of ideas, but I would kind of wager that maybe you don't either. And I wonder what it means that at least one part of your belief in a God is based on biology that's pretty readily disprovable. If it were readily disprovable, I understand that you haven't conceded that.
I would like to hear it be disproved. I'm not sure that I'm not the only one that knows anything about a hippopotamus. And,
Bernard, Bernard, I've affirmed to you that they have split hooves and they do not chew the cud, just like you had claimed about the pigs. So, like, I get that you're not going to accept that, and that's perfectly fine. Go and I guess look up hippopotamus facts.
I'm going to look into it. I will definitely look into this. No, I'm not right. Saying that
And the last question I want to ask you then, Bernard, before I let you go, is if you go and look into this, if you talk to an expert, if you find out for yourself through means that you absolutely trust and appreciate that, in fact, hippopotamus do hit these criteria, what happens next? What does that mean to you?
That would be a big problem. But
okay, well, fair enough. I hope that you'll wrestle with that problem, and I hope that you'll seek out, some community support in whatever it means for you to embrace or work through that challenge.
And what? Let's say the opposite of the true is true, and it ends up that the pig is the only one. Would that mean anything for you?
Honestly, no, because it just means that there is this one animal that meets these two criteria. It doesn't, to me, prove that these criteria were designed by somebody who is all-knowing and all-powerful.
How does the one that wrote this? How does the one that wrote it know that? That's what I meant.
Well, I have no idea. People write things all the time that end up being true or not true, and none of them have been God as far as I know.
And also, I feel like you're asking, Bernard, I feel like you're asking, how could anybody know this but God? But literally, you can just observe these things. You can observe what animals have split hooves, and then you can also observe their eating habits. So I'm not exactly sure what is required for, a cosmic wizard in order to know these things. Like, you can just easily observe these things.
Know that it's the only one. To notice the only one. That's the first thing you can observe a pig and see what it is. I'm just saying, how would you notice the only one? The only one that can know that would be the one that created them, because a person can't know that that's the only one in the whole animal kingdom. Who knows the whole animal kingdom by himself?
So Bernard, let me leave you with this. Do you know every animal that has ever existed ever on the face of the earth?
No, I don't.
Okay, then there's probably another animal out there that meets your criteria. There's probably another animal out there that meets your criteria, and that animal is the hippopotamus.
You say it's the hippopotamus. I'm going to look into that.
All right, well, please do, and take good care of yourself as you work to wrestle with that, and ask yourself some curious questions. What does this mean to me? How do I feel about this? What do I do about it? I appreciate you giving us a call and checking in, and I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope that you keep digging.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, definitely taking some interesting calls today. Having a good time so far. I want to remind people that we are live every Sunday at 1 p.m. Central on YouTube. But remember, if you can't make it for whatever reason, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, to include Patreon. As a Patreon subscriber, you get access to bonus content and early releases. We include recordings of TikTok live shows that take place Tuesday and Thursday evenings. So get on Patreon and check us out. I want to thank our top 5 patrons this week, folks like Oops All Singularity, Dingleberry Jackson, Kalevi Helvetti, and J.A. Carlton, Moldred D. Malcontent. I stumble on that one every time, but I love saying it. And our honorable mention this week in the number 6 spot is Casey Kickendell. I'm going to need a sip of water as I try to go over all of this before we get back into our discussion on mythicism. And because we did ask a pretty interesting question at the top of the show, I believe, and I'd love to bring our friend Richard in to talk about it with us. So as we get Richard all locked in, I want to ask you, Godless Engineer, what kinds of evidence would we reasonably expect if Jesus had been an actual historical figure? And do we have that evidence? Oh, I believe I have you muted.
So sorry, I totally forgot. No, I don't think that we have the evidence that I would expect, but also I would just think that we would have the same kinds of evidence that we have for other Messiah figures that supposedly were trying to fulfill supposed prophecies. And I'm talking about like the Egyptian. We have accounts of the Egyptian that we can reliably attribute to Josephus and stuff. So like just textual accounts that are not influenced by scripture, basically, or at least sources that are inspired by scripture. We would hope that there would be some real historical evidence.
That topic came up a little bit at the top of the show, and I'd be interested if you can to clarify just a little bit, not necessarily that having a religious position completely negates your perspective or the account that you are telling about the veracity of Jesus, but how do we need to consider those in different categories, or do we?
Well, I mean, it's all about source criticism, and you got to be able to actually tie your information to like real history. And that's where the problem lies, is that I think the best evidence that we have for a historical Jesus actually is in Paul's epistles. But the problem that Paul's epistles presents to us is that he only gets his information from a vision of Jesus or a revelation of Jesus and from the scriptures, which are both devoid of any kind of real tangible historical evidence. And Paul in Galatians 1:11 specifically states that he did not get any of his information from any human source. He only got it from a celestial Jesus and from scripture, which totally separates himself from any real history.
Yeah. Well, so how persuasive are the parallels between Jesus's story and older or maybe contemporary mythological, like death and rebirth, dying and rising gods?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's incredibly similar. If you break down the skeletal structure of Christianity, especially the Christianity that Paul teaches in his theology, it's the same skeletal structure as mystery cults that were going around at the time. These mystery cults, these Hellenistic mystery cults, they taught about a savior who was going to undergo some kind of passion to suffer for people that believed in him, and then would be subsequently killed and then somehow resurrected in one way or another in order to procure everlasting life for their adherents. And so considering like all of it, and this even goes deeper to like the ceremonial meals that other mystery cults would have incorporated into their worship, and even into the language. Paul uses a lot of the mystery cult language when he references different types of believers. So there's a lot of parallels, even in the gospel versions of Jesus, to these other mystery cult saviors.
Yeah, when you talk about mystery cults, I am imagining, the Freemasons and things along those lines. How is that comparison relevant or totally irrelevant as we look back on this era of history?
Well, I'm not sure about Freemasons, but like the mystery cults in the Mediterranean at the time that would be most relevant would be like the Isis and Osiris cult in Egypt, or the Zoroastrianism. Those are all mystery cults. There's more that I could list, but those are mystery cults that have the very same elements that we find in Christianity. And I think that it's very relevant to it, because that means that Christianity is just a syncretism between these mystery cult theologies and Judaism, therefore making another mystery cult that is just supposedly, according to like Paul and the other apostles, better than all the other mystery cults because it's a Jewish one.
Sure. Yeah, well, so I'm more than happy to challenge the veracity of the education that I was brought up with. I know that it is full of holes and flaws, but I have to say, not just in high school, but even at the collegiate level, I had history professors make comparisons between Jesus Christ and Julius Caesar in terms of the like preponderance of evidence, that you would have to say that Julius Caesar never existed in order to say that Jesus Christ never existed. Is that in any way true? Like, do most historians accept that at least at a minimum, a historical Jesus existed?
Well, I feel like that involves a presupposition of historicity, because when we actually look at the evidence that we're presented with, everything that occurs after Paul is inspired either by Paul or by the existing Christian community. And this existing Christian community would have already believed in the theological version of Jesus rather than a historical one. We can look to early church fathers, like even in the early 2nd century, and they did not care about any kind of historical veracity of the story. They only cared about the theological truth that it presents, like this everlasting life that it presents, and it seems to procure for you and all this stuff. And so it was very obvious that the historical nature of Jesus wasn't all that important until much later, like in the 3rd century, when you had people that were challenging the historicity of Christianity. But you also have evidence in like First Peter, where it basically fabricates a direct meeting with Jesus in order to combat people that say that Christians just follow cleverly devised myths. And so it's very obvious that there were several sects of Christians going around at that time. And I think that it just so happened that the more historical sect, the sect that created this historical story for Jesus, that's just the one that won out in the end, and then either did not preserve or forcibly suppressed the other versions of Christianity.
Yeah. Well, so Richard, I'm curious to hear from you how these notions of, maybe we'll say, Western history and Western theology line up at all with what we know of the historicity of the Buddha, for instance, or other important figures in Buddhism and in other philosophies.
Yeah, the Buddha's an interesting one for you to pick out, actually, because there is even less, I think, evidence that he exists. In fact, one scholar, Eric Frohlwallner, I think they called him. This is going back to the 50s. He wrote a piece called the Historical Data We Possess on the Person and the Doctrine of the Buddha. And he comes up with this really interesting kind of way of framing it, which to us as skeptics, I think it'd sit into a lot to what Godless Engineer said, but to us as skeptics, would really raise eyebrows. And he said something along the lines of the most ancient tradition unanimously ascribes these teachings to the Buddha. And it seems to me quite arbitrary to refuse credence to this tradition. So it's basically saying is, look, this is tradition. Who are we to argue against that?
People have been saying for hundreds, if not thousands of years that these folks existed. So therefore, they must have existed.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. And we see, I forgot the guy's name, there's an Islamic scholar who teaches in the US, a practicing Muslim, and he's cast doubt on Muhammad's historicity as well in recent years, which has, as you can probably imagine, caused quite a bit of kickback from that. But it shows that in kind of scholarship now, there is a growing movement across the board to say, hang on a minute, are we taking this serious enough? Is the evidence that is proposed good enough to attribute these characters a historical life? Or is it the case that indeed they are fabrications, or they are used for political ends, or they have come up from an amalgamation of characters? There's lots of nuances to this, and I love this conversation. Because of the nuance, and I think it's one that shows in scholarship that we have this kind of thing across the board, where we get, look, this evidence, which we've all got this evidence, we've all got this same evidence, but how are we interpreting it? Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about this is and I think John touched on this earlier in the show, it's not a thing where this is like theists against atheists. This is a thing where lots of different atheists disagree with each other. So scholars within atheism, or agnosticism, or however they like to kind of promote themselves, they don't believe in God. They have differences of opinion, and they're looking at pretty much the same source material, and it's the way they're interpreting it. This is a nuanced conversation, and it's really, really fascinating to me. I'm not a biblical scholar. I come from the Eastern traditions side of things. So I've only just started reading into all this stuff with the Christianity and the Bible and things, maybe the past 5 years. And it's really interesting to me seeing how all these different opinions are coming out. And just before the show, when we were talking in the green room, Godless Engineer mentioned a theory that I'd not, a hypothesis that I'd never heard about. And that's really, really interesting. And I want to go and look that up a little bit. John, do you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Oh, yeah. So this was on the question of Q and if there are better, explanations for the synoptic problem. And there is a fair error hypothesis that actually stipulates that we don't need like the Q source, M source, or L source. All we need are the Gospels as they exist, because Matthew used Mark. It's very obvious that Matthew used Mark, and then Luke used both Matthew and Mark in order to generate his Gospel. And then, of course, this is outside of that, but just to round it out here, it's coming into more of a mainstream view that John actually used all three of those Gospels in order to generate his Gospel. So as far as the Q, M, and L source to explain the synoptic problem, we don't actually need those because we already have a much simpler and less ad hoc hypothesis, and that's the fair error hypothesis.
Yeah, well, so I don't want to harp on this question because I feel like I bring it up a lot on this show. Maybe it's something that I am just trying to wrap my head around. But growing up in a very evangelical background, we had a very strong notion that the Bible was completely inerrant, that it was a absolutely perfect and complete document. And I have come to recognize that that is not the way that most Christians have believed. It may or may not be the way that most Christians or other religious folks currently believe. And I think I'm hearing from both of you that this idea that we would even be bothered by the notion of whether or not there was a historical religious figure is kind of a new idea. Is that fair to say at all?
I mean, I think so, because like I was saying, the early church fathers, they were more concerned with the theological truths of the religion as opposed to the historical truths. You also have people like I believe it's Irenaeus, maybe in the early 2nd century, who specifically talks about how the Jesus that they preach is the exact same as the sons of Zeus or these other pagan deities. They accomplish the exact same things that Jesus does. It's just that Jesus is better because he's Jesus. But also, this is the first instance of the claim that Satan went back in time, or maybe not back in time, but he littered history with basically what he claims is copycat versions of Jesus in order to confuse Christians at that time. And so they weren't really all that concerned about any kind of historical nature to it. Because I guess
I'm concerned. Does that mean they just sort of took it for granted, or that it wasn't important in the first place? Or is that question even fair when we're trying to get into the mind of somebody from a different culture and time?
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit difficult to get into the mind of people from this culture, especially in the Jewish and Christian sort of sects there, because they definitely thought of Jesus as a flesh and blood person, but they had more of a concept of the firmament being a real place and heaven and hell being real places. In several parts of the New Testament, they actually describe hell as Hades, and they use that kind of nomenclature for it. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of bleed through in, Hellenistic ideas into Christianity. And so I think that they considered it to be a real thing without it actually being happening on Earth. I don't think that they ever considered it to be on Earth. I think that they kind of were in the know. Those that were indoctrinated deep into the faith, they knew that it was a celestial thing, a purely celestial thing. And we know this because of how the Iris and Osiris cult operated. We actually have from Plutarch a description of how the cult operated, and there were these earthly stories that were told about Isis and Osiris to the uninitiated. But once you get initiated into the mystery cult, you were told about how, well, all of this stuff actually happened in the celestial realm out there and not actually historically on Earth. So there definitely was sort of like this tiered system in these mystery cults as to what information is revealed to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's two other important points to when looking at this as well. The first one, I think Godless Engineer touched on with the first caller, when, you know, and I think it was Jesse, the first caller, was trying to kind of sidestep this a little bit, I think, and, you know, introducing, look, this is really important to look at what's actually attributed to Jesus as well when we're actually looking back at this. And if you compare him to someone like Cleopatra, who was contemporary to Jesus, she only lived 30 years before Jesus. And if you look at the claims made about him and his importance in history, and we look that we literally, from a contemporary point of view to his life, we have nothing. There is literally zero. And if we look at Cleopatra, who was another important figure at that time, but in the grand scheme of things, if God is true and Jesus is God, nowhere near as important, the contemporary evidence for Cleopatra is we have coins that have been commissioned. We have not only artwork that was commissioned by her, but different styles of artwork because she came from a Plutonic Greek dynasty. So we've got Greek style busts of her that were commissioned by her. We also have Egyptian style artwork on the side of Egyptian buildings to commemorate the fact that she was the leader of Egypt. We have coins, we have contemporary accounts, we have all these things which are contemporary to her life. There is strong evidence that she existed. And you look at allegedly the most important figure in history, and there is nothing contemporary to him. And if you and look, touching on again what Godless Engineer brought up about the Hellenistic influence, when you look at the going slightly past the very, very early stages of Christianity, we're late first into the 4th century, what you get is a huge Greek influence, which not only influences, you know, the kind of ideas surrounding, you know, these mystery cult ideas that John was talking about, but also influence the theology of Christianity, and they hugely influenced the theology of it. And a lot of the early ecumenical councils contained arguments that were actually discussing this theology, and it was very much, you can literally trace the arguments from where ideas, for example, the idea of the Holy Spirit is one that's really, really important. The modern take on the Holy Spirit is this kind of guiding influence, this spirit of, you know, strength, and, you know, it will guide you and it will guide you to the right thing. That's not what the early Christians thought the Holy Spirit was. They literally thought it was the voice of prophecy that came down, physically came down in fire and wind. It was physically,
it was a material and tangible component.
Yeah. And it came down and it gave you the voice of prophecy. And this was in the very early church. This was one of the things that really, really gave kind of authority in the church. And it wasn't until one of the early bishops started making very questionable judgments using this that the kind of his contemporaries got together and said, hang on a minute, we don't like what's coming out of his mouth. We need to kind of demote the Holy Spirit. And this stuff's traceable. This stuff is historically traceable. You can follow these arguments. We have historical sources for these later arguments. And it shows that ideas were influenced by Greek thought. It shows that ideas were being discussed and coming out in different notions, and the winner was the one who kind of all got together and decided, this guy's a heretic, we're not having that in our camp anymore, let's shove that to one side. This is all documented stuff, and it all for me leads to a really, really interesting conversation about, did Jesus actually exist?
Yeah, which is a question that I always sort of blew off as unimportant. But the more we get into it, the more I really recognize that not only does this have pretty meaningful ramifications for the world, but also there are so many assumptions culturally that I think we make that this is just settled, that this is just obvious, that this isn't even worth questioning, that really don't hold up when we start to scratch the surface. So I really appreciate you gentlemen kind of walking me through a lot of those pieces. I do want to say thank you to our incredible crew and get them up on the screen. First, I'm going to quickly say thank you to Ann Johnson and the $5 super chat. Ann offers love Godless Engineer and Christy. Would love to hear from some theists today. Hope we did a great job with that for you today, Ann. Thank you to everybody on our crew. I appreciate getting to see y'all's wonderful faces. I also want to, in particular, take a moment to say thank you to Jonathan, who's a frequent face of the nonprofits and who also assists us behind the scenes. He works on all of the ACA shows and helps make all of this possible. Not only is he here with us on Talk Heathen, but he's hosts this week's Nonprofits episode. So tune in Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 p.m. Central to check it out. Thank you, Jonathan.
There we have there.
Yeah, well, and thank you, Richard, for joining us. Godless Engineer, any other thoughts or anybody that you want to thank before we send out our love rings and thank everybody for joining us?
I appreciate everybody here allowing me to come on and fill, a very big spot today. And, I just always love the opportunity to talk about this particular topic because I feel like a lot of people shy away from it, but it's really not that scary.
Yeah, you say that, and then when I try to follow the conversations between you and the caller and you and Richard as we're dropping all of these historical names, I'm just like, I'm a mental health clinician. I want to talk about feelings. But that being said, I do appreciate you breaking it down for us, making it a lot more digestible and challenging some assumptions that I think I have never really realized don't hold up.
Thank you all again for having me.
For sure. Well, I suppose we will just go ahead and remind everybody that if you don't believe, this is your community and we appreciate you being here. And if you do believe, we certainly don't hate you. We're just not convinced.
Not convinced.
We want the truth. So watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Call 512-991-9242 or visit tiny.cc/call TW.